So let's go into chapter 6 here. And the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. Oh, haven't we saw that before?
Yeah.
So after the 40 years, look at that. And the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. 40 years of peace. They forgot all about the terribleness.
Yeah.
And they did evil again in the sight of the Lord. And the Lord delivered them into the hand of Midian for 7 years. And the hand of Midian prevailed against Israel, and because of the Midianites, the children of Israel made them the dens which are in the mountains and caves and strongholds. And so, you see, Israel is hiding. They're hiding in the dens and the caves and some strongholds that they made to hide from the Midianites. And so it was when Israel had sown that the Midianites came, and the Amalekites and the children of the east, even they came up against them. It was a reoccurring problem. Remember, we said these people are primarily farmers, right? So they sow their seed, they plant, they sow, they have their animals, and then annually or repeatedly, these armies, the Midianites and the Amalekites, come down and they steal everything that they have. And so they're living in the caves, they're living in the dens, they've got these little strong, but it's really hard to live. Because every time they think they're going to get ahead, someone comes and takes it. I used to live in this place where it was so bad. I lived in Davenport, Iowa. It was, where I lived was so bad. I had a park 3 blocks away from the apartment that I was in. And it was so bad that the crime was terrible. One time I went out there, and somebody stole my battery. I was broke. I had a car, a little Montego, and it was paid for, but it was a junker. And I had, I needed that battery. I didn't have any money to go out and get a battery. So that put me out it took me about a month before I could get a battery for it. So I get the battery, and so I figured I'm going to outsmart them. I put a chain on the hood. So now you couldn't, it was a big, thick chain. I thought, well, that'll preserve the battery, right? So I come out like the next week, put my key in the car, turn the key, nothing. I said, oh man, they must have got the battery. So I went around the front. The battery had the chain, and the hood was chained down. I said, there's the battery. They stole the starter.
From the bottom.
They went under the car, dropped the starter. And I'm like, this was a poor side of town. But my thought was, why do poor people steal from poor people?
Ignorant.
Why? The people are already poor. They're already suffering. Why are you stealing from them? At least go to the wealthier people and steal.
You got no sense.
That's too much trouble. They'll steal your... people ride their bikes downtown, and they put a chain around there, and they come out and the tires are gone. Verse 4, and they encamped against them and destroyed the increase of the earth till thou come unto Gaza, and left no sustenance for Israel, neither sheep nor ox nor ass. So they took all the animals they could find, and they kept doing this. For they came up with their cattle and their tents, and they came as grasshoppers for the multitude. For both they and their camels were without number, and they entered into the land to destroy it. Now these Midianites were the first ones to learn how to use camels for military purposes. And the camels were very good. It provided them a much advantage. And you see, they came as grasshoppers for the multitude. That's just saying like a swarm. Really, the word is locusts. And if you've ever seen how locusts come through, I mean, they just come through. They can devastate a whole, acreage. They come in, zzz, you hear that, zzz, and then you see, they just devour everything in front of them. Yeah. And that's what they're saying. That's what the Bible's saying is when these Midianites, these Amalekites came, it was like they devoured everything. And it was like without number. There were so many of them. Verse 6, and Israel was greatly impoverished because of the Midianites, and the children of Israel cried unto the Lord. And it came to pass, when the children of Israel cried unto the Lord because of the Midianites, that the Lord sent a prophet unto the children of Israel, which says to them, Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, I brought you up from Egypt, and brought you forth out of the house of bondage, and I delivered you. Because, they're probably telling each other, why did the Lord let this happen to us? And so the prophet comes, he said, I brought you out of Egypt, I brought you forth out of the house of bondage. In verse 9, and I delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians, and out of the hand of all them that oppressed you, and drove them out from before you, and gave you their land. And I said unto you, I am the Lord your God, fear not the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you dwell, but you have not obeyed my voice. That's why you're in this predicament. That's what the prophet's telling them. At verse 11, there came an angel of the Lord, and he sat under an oak tree, which was in Ophrah, that pertained unto Joash the Abiezrite, and his son Gideon threshed wheat by the winepress to hide it from the Midianites. So he's threshing the wheat, but he's doing it by the winepress. He's trying to hide it so the Midianites, if the Midianites see him threshing wheat, they'll know he's got wheat and they'll come and steal it, right? So he has to hide. And so verse 12, and the angel of the Lord appears to this Gideon and says to him, the Lord is with thee, thy mighty man of valor. He's a nobody. He didn't do anything great. And yet, the angel says, O mighty man of valor. So Gideon says in verse 13, he said, Oh, my Lord, if the Lord be with us, why then has all this befallen us? Well, he wasn't there to listen to what the prophet said. He was working. And where be all his miracles, which our fathers told us of, saying, Did not the Lord... Doesn't this sound like people today? If God really out there, where's the miracles? If God's really out there, why you got all this cancer? Why you got all diabetes and all kinds of paralysis? And look what people are forced to live with. If God is, where's this compassionate God? Where's this God of love? Well, that's what Gideon's saying. He's saying, where are all the miracles? Why has this befallen us? Which our fathers told us of these miracles, saying, Did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt? But now the Lord has forsaken us and delivered us into the hands of the Midianites. Verse 14, and the Lord looked upon him and said, Go in this thy might, and thou shalt save Israel. From the hand of the Midianites have not I sent thee? So he is commissioned to be the deliverer. He don't have any power. He's hiding from the Midianites. He's scared. And the angel comes, calls him a mighty man of valor, and says, You're going to deliver Israel. Verse 15, and he said unto him, O my Lord, wherewith shall I save Israel? Behold, my family is poor in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house. And this is very common. You talk to Christians, you talk to you talk to them about their testimony, and they'll tell you, God called God called me to do something, and I didn't have any strength to do that. When pastor was called to be pastor, he didn't know how to be a pastor. That's right. God had to do it. And the Lord said unto him, Surely I will be with thee, and thou shalt smite the Midianites as one man. In other words, all these Midianites, it's going to be like smiting one man for you. And he said unto him, If now I have found grace in thy sight, show me a sign that thou talkest with me. And it's debatable. What we're going to read next is debatable. Can you ask God for a sign? Now, I know it can get ridiculous. I mean, some people say if the phone rings 3 times in the next hour, I'll know. No, it could be a telemarketing.
That doesn't work.
I wouldn't do something. Now, something like what he's doing here, watch what he did. I mean, this takes a miraculous hand of God. He said, first he tells the angel, he says, don't depart, I pray thee, until I come unto thee and bring forth my present and set it before thee. And he said, the angel said, I will tarry, or I will wait till you come again. And Gideon went in, and he made ready a kid and unleavened cakes of an ephah of flour, and the flesh he put in a basket. He put the broth in a pot and brought it out unto him under the oak and presented it. In other words, he'd given this offering, right, to God. And the angel of God said unto him, take the flesh and the unleavened cakes and lay them upon this rock and pour out the broth. And he did so. So he pours it upon this rock. Then in the rock where the angel was sitting. And the angel of the Lord put forth the end of his staff that was in his hand, and he touched the flesh and the unleavened cakes, and there rose up fire out of the rock. Fire came out of the rock. Fire didn't come from him. Fire came out of the rock and consumed the flesh and the unleavened cakes. He knew that wasn't no fireplace. Fire came out of the rock. Then the angel of the Lord departed out of his sight. He asked for a sign. He sure got one.
Sure, big time.
And when Gideon perceived that he was an angel of the Lord, Gideon says, alas, O Lord God, because I have seen an angel of the Lord face to face. They thought, Israel had this saying that if you ever saw God face to face, that you would die. Because no one can look at the face of God.
Too bright.
But for one thing, this was not the face of God. This was an angel. Right? But he was afraid. Well, we saw before he was afraid. He's a scaredy cat. And yet God called him mighty man of valor. And sometimes God has a bunch of scaredy cats. He's got to choose somebody.
Right.
He doesn't choose you because you're strong. He doesn't choose you because you're good looking or because you have some type of talent. God chooses you usually because you're willing. You're willing to do it, and he will supply. And the Lord said unto him, peace be unto thee. Fear not. Thou shalt not die. He just got through saying you're going to deliver Israel. How is he going to deliver Israel if he's dead? Right? Then Gideon built an altar there unto the Lord and called it Jehovah Shalom. That means a peace of Jehovah. Unto this day it is yet in Ophrah of the Abizarites. That's his family, relatives. And it came to pass the same night that the Lord said unto him. Now the Lord is speaking to Gideon at night. So he's probably sleeping. Or laying himself down, and he hears the voice of God. And God says, take your father's young bullock. His father's not going to be happy about this. Take your father's young bullock, even the second bullock of 7 years old. Well, they kept these sacrifices around for 7 years because they were fully developed. And remember, God wanted perfect sacrifices. Without blemish. Remember that? But this is the second one. What happened to the first one? I think it was already offered. Because what we're going to see is there was a problem with his father. His father had built a temple to Baal. And I think he offered the first one to the god Baal. And all the rest of the people used to come to that little temple. Not temple, but altar. And God says, you go and you get your father's second bullock of 7 years. Throw down the altar of Baal that thy father hath, and cut down the grove that is by it. Have you heard of the Asherah? Asherah is the same goddess as, she's actually Ishtar. We get the name Ishtar, we get Easter from Ishtar. She was the goddess who was worshipped. Remember, you have Baal. That was the god they were worshiping. And then the Asherah, they used to have these groves. And they raised these trees. And a lot of them they carved into like little penises for fertility. Okay? And they look like and some of them I saw some that looked like a goddess. You know, they I guess just skill in carving them. So cut down the grove that is by it. And he built an altar unto the Lord. Those are sacred trees, by the way. And so he built an altar unto the Lord thy God upon the top of this rock in the ordered place. Take the second bullock, offer a burnt sacrifice with the wood of the grove which thou shalt cut down. In other words, he told him, now the father, he still lives in it with his father. The father built the altar to the false god. That's strike one, right? His father was offering sacrifices to the false god. Gideon is told by God, you tear down the altar to Baal. You set up an altar for me. You go over and get the second bullock as a sacrifice. And you go to cut down all the sacred groves of this goddess, the Asherah. And you use that wood as fire on my altar to consume this sacrifice. And Gideon does it. So Gideon took 10 men of his servants and did as the Lord had said unto him. And so it was, because he feared his father's household and the men of the city, he could not do it by day. He did it by night. Here again, Gideon shows he's a fraidy cat. Right? He does it at night. But I don't blame him for it. He said to himself, well, I can't do this, and if somebody sees me, they're going to stop me. So he gets 10 people to help him. And when the men of the city arose early in the morning, notice it's not just the father, but the men of the city. So men of the city, they were mad that the altar Baal was torn down. When the men of the city arose early in the morning, behold, the altar of Baal was cast down, and a grove was cut down that was by it, and the second bullock was offered upon the altar that was built. They wanted that second one to offer up to Baal. Now there is no altar to Baal. Now there is no altar to these sacred trees of the, burned all the penises, those wooden penises. And verse 29, and they said one to another, who has done this thing? And when they inquired and asked, they said, Gideon. Gideon, the son of Joash, has done this thing. Then the men of the city said to his father Joash, bring out your son that he may die. Because he has cast down the altar of Baal, and because he has cut down the grove that was by it. And you would think the father would be furious. He's the one that built the altar. But now we see the father seems to have done that and went along with this whole program. He was a fraidy cat. But then he got courage here. Father said unto all that stood against him, he said, will you plead for Baal? If Baal's a god, let him plead for himself. And he stood up for his son. I don't think he wanted to do false worship. He just didn't have the guts to stand against the people. Till Gideon did this. And he said, will you plead for Baal? Will you save him? He that will plead for him, let him be put to death while it is yet morning. If he be a god, let him plead for himself, because one has cast down his altar. What's he doing? He's coming back. He's referring to the law. He said, will you plead for him? Let him be put to death. Because the law requires, if you're worshiping false gods, you should be put to death. That's what Moses' law required. And he tells him, why do you need to plead for Baal? If Baal's really a living God, why does he need you to take up his defense? Because one has cast down his altar. Therefore, on that day, he called Gideon Jerubbaal, saying, let Baal plead against him because he has thrown down his altar. Jerubbaal, this word means that Baal will plead against this person who has offended him. In other words, let Baal do it himself. If Baal's a real god, let him take matters into his own hands. Well, this name stuck. Remember, I told you the other guy had a nickname, but this is serious. This nickname stuck, and it became something. This one act caused Gideon to get very popular, and everybody, the word went out. Everybody knew what this Gideon did. Then all the Midianites and the Amalekites and the children of the east were gathered together, and they went over and pitched in the valley of Jezreel. That's the same place as before, the Megiddo, or where we're going to have Armageddon. But the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon, and he blew a trumpet, and Abiezer was gathered after him. That's his family, the people of Abiezer. They were gathered after him, and he sent messengers throughout all Manasseh, who also was gathered after him. And he sent messengers to Asher and to Zebulun and Naphtali, and they came up to meet him. And Gideon said unto God, if thou wilt save Israel by my hand, as thou hast said, behold, I will put a fleece of wool on the floor. Now, he's going to prove whether God is with him. So I'm going to put a fleece of wool on the floor, and if the dew be on the fleece only, and it be dry on the earth, beside then shall I know that thou wilt save Israel by my hand, as they said. In other words, I'm going to put this wool on the ground. I'm going to go to sleep. When I get up in the morning, if the wool is wet, but the ground is dry, I'll know that it's your will for me to do this. And as it was so, for he rose up early in the morning and thrust the fleece together, wringed the dew out of the fleece, a full bowl of water. But the ground was dry. And Gideon said unto God, let not thine anger be hot against me, and I will speak but this once. Let me prove, I pray thee, but this once with the fleece, let it now be dry only on the fleece, and upon all the ground let there be dew. So he's doing just the opposite thing. Because at first he thinks it's a miracle, and then his doubt kicks in, and he said, well, maybe it always does this if you put a fleece on the ground. Maybe the fleece just captures water. So he's going to try it the other way. And guess what? It works.
It's dry, the ground is wet.
So now let it be dry only upon the fleece, and upon all the ground let there be dew. And God did that. God did so that night, for it was dry upon the fleece only. There was dew on all the ground. Chapter 7, verse 1. Then Jerubbaal, who is Gideon, and all the people that were with him rose up early, pitched beside the well of Harod, so that the host of the Midianites were on the north side of them by the hill of Moreh in the valley. And the Lord said unto Gideon, the people that are with thee are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hands, lest Israel vaunt themselves against me, saying, my own hand has saved me. So God says, all these people that you invited to come out to fight against the Midianites, they all came out, but you got too many people here. He says, there's way too many. So he's going to have those that want to go home, go home. So now, therefore, go to proclaim in the ears of the people, saying, whosoever is fearful and afraid, let him return and depart early from the Mount Gilead. You know, a lot of people, when you ask who will volunteer to do stuff, there's people that volunteer, and they really don't want to do it. And there was a lot of those. They're risking their lives if they go up with Gideon. Right? But they're doing it because the neighbor's saying, let's go, let's go. Well, now he says, whoever wants to go home, whoever's afraid, whoever wants to go back home, go. We don't need you.
That's right.
And so, that's what God told him. And there returned 22,000 22,000 of them left. Only 10,000 remained. So total, there was 32,000 of them. And that's about 25%, 1/4 of the armies that they were going to go up against. So they were already outnumbered 4-1. And now, almost twice as many people left, 22,000, only 10,000 stayed. So you would think, okay, so now God's got 10,000. And, Gideon's thinking, well, God can deliver us with 10,000. And the Lord said to Gideon, the people are yet too many. You got too many people. Pastors, sometimes you hear about pastors in the church saying that, well, if I had more people, I could do this. And if I had more people, I could do that. But that's not God's way. God can send you the people that'll do what you need them to do. Amen. You don't need you need a church of 32,000 members. God will send you the right ones. Am I right?
John can do just about everything else.
There you go.
That's all I need.
We need more of him.
No.
And the Lord said to Gideon, the people are yet too many. Bring them down unto the water, and I will try them, or I will test them for thee at the water. And it shall be that of whom I say unto thee, this shall go with thee, the same shall go with thee. And of whomsoever I say, this shall not go with thee, the same shall not go. So God is going to take the 10,000 now, and he's going to eliminate certain ones. So he brought down the people to the water, and the Lord said to Gideon, every one that laps of the water with his tongue as a dog laps, him shalt thou set by himself. Likewise, every one that boweth down upon his knees to drink. So you got two different kinds of people. One person goes up to the water and sticks their head in it, goes and drinks like that. The other one bends over and takes his cups of water in his hand and goes like this. Now God's not saying what he's doing. He's just, Gideon notices, God told him, he says, the ones that lap like a dog, he said, you put those into one place, and the other ones who take the hand to their mouth, you put those in another area, right? And verse 6, the number of them that lapped, putting their hand to their mouth, were 300. Now there were 10,000. There were 300 that used their hand, right? Now I don't think there was anything bad about drinking water the other way. That wasn't the point. The point was God's going to eliminate them. God says 10,000 people is already too many, because if you get the victory, you're going to think you did it. So God brings it down to 300 guys. There's like 120 some thousand of these Midianites that they're going to go after. And God's only got, now he had 32,000. Now he's got 300.
They're really outnumbered.
And Gideon's probably thinking, oh my goodness, I knew this was going to happen. I knew I couldn't do this. And so verse 7, the Lord said to Gideon, by the 300 men that lap will I save you, and deliver the Midianites into your hand, and let all the other people go, every man unto his place. In other words, take these other guys that are not of the 300, send them home too. So the people took victuals in their hands and their trumpets, and he sent all the rest of Israel, every man unto his tent, and retained only those 300 men, and the host of Midian was beneath him in the valley. And it came to pass the same night the Lord said, arise, get thee down unto the host, for I have delivered it into thy hand. You notice how God's always positively affirming that he already did something? And I know that in the Word of Faith movement, they have this phrase. They say, God calls things not as though they were. I don't know if you've ever heard that. But you see that a lot in the Bible. When God said, just like when he said, Gideon, you mighty man of valor. He wasn't a mighty man of valor yet. But God already was calling him that. You know, when you become a Christian, you're a child of God. God calls you a child of God, even if you're not acting like a child of God. You'll grow into it. He says, I have delivered them into your hand. But if thou fear to go down, go thou with Phurah, thy servant, down to the host. In other words, the Midianites. In other words, he knows Gideon's a scaredy cat, doesn't he? So he says, go down to the camp, sneak to the camp, and listen to what they're saying. So, and thou shalt hear what they say, and afterwards shall thy hands be strengthened to go down unto the host. Then he went down with Phurah, his servant, unto the outside of the armed men that were in his host. And the Midianites and the Amalekites and all the children of the east lay along in the valley like grasshoppers for the multitude, and their camels were without number as the sand by the seaside for multitude. So there's so many of them, right? You know if you're a scaredy cat, if you're afraid, if you're a coward, and you're sneaking on up these multitude of military men, and you just know, I would just know I'm going to kneel on a stick, it's going to go crack, and my head's going to come off. And that's what he's got to be thinking, because he's a scaredy cat. And so when Gideon was come, behold, there was a... Gideon, now, what's the chances of him going down and hearing this guy who's a Midianite telling the other guy the dream that he had? I mean, there's 120,000 people here. And where Gideon went down, there's the guy that had the dream. That's God. And when Gideon was come, behold, there was a man that had told a dream unto his fellow, said, behold, I dreamed a dream, and lo, a cake of barley bread tumbled into the hosts of Midian, and came unto a tent, and smote it, that it fell over, and turned it, that the tent lay along. And his fellow answered and said, this is nothing else save the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel, for into his hand has God delivered Midian and all the host. This is a Midianite saying this. Remember when we looked at in Jericho and Rahab the harlot? She said, we all know that you're going to take this city. We're afraid. We're terrified. She knew more than they knew. And this Midianite, now you don't know how many of the other soldiers were afraid too. How many heard that they're going to be taken, that they're going to be overcome. And it was so when Gideon heard the telling of the dream and the interpretation thereof, that he worshipped and returned to the host of Israel and said, arise, for the Lord has delivered into your hand the hosts of Midian. And now he's saying the same thing God is. He's saying God's already done it. And he divided the 300 men into 3 companies. He split them into 3 companies, so there's 100 in each company. He put a trumpet in every man's hand with empty pitchers and lamps within the pitchers. And he said unto them, look on me and do likewise. Behold, when I come to the outside of the camp, it shall be that as I do, you shall do. And what he's going to do, he gave them these jars and to cover the torches, so nobody could see the light. And then they got these trumpets, right? And he says, when I blow with the trumpet, I and all that are with me, then blow ye the trumpets also on every side of the camp, and say, the sword, shout the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. So Gideon and the 100 men that were with him came unto the outside of the camp in the beginning of the middle watch. And they had but newly set their watch, and they blew the trumpets and brake the pitchers that were in their hands. And the 3 companies blew the trumpets and brake the pitchers, and held the lamps in their left hand and the trumpets in their right hand to blow withal. And they cried, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. And they stood every man in his place round about the camp, and all the host ran and cried and fled. So the Midian, here's what happened. These 300, this is why God only wanted 300. They took the pitchers, they hid the torches, they had the trumpets, and then when they broke those pictures. All of a sudden, torches everywhere, and they hear these trumpets everywhere, and they thought they were brigades of soldiers. They thought there was thousands of them. You know, one torch represented maybe a couple hundred. And there was only 300. But there were 300 torches, 300 trumpets. They were all shouting. And these Midianites, I mean, these were trained soldiers. They were the best. They were the best. They were powerful. And they were terrified. God does, isn't God cool? I mean, God He just has the way to do things, God doesn't have a book that has all this stuff in there that tells him how to do it. He just thinks of this stuff. So Gideon and the 100 men that were, I said that, they break their picture. And they stood, verse 21, and they stood every man in his place round about the camp, and all the host ran and cried and fled, and the 300 blew the trumpets. The Lord set every man's sword against his fellow, even throughout all the hosts, and the hosts fell to Beersheba and Zererath, and to the border of Abel-Meholah unto Tabbath. And the men of Israel gathered themselves together out of Naphtali, and out of Asher, and out of all Manasseh, and pursued after the Midianites. And Gideon sent messengers throughout all Mount Ephraim, saying, come down against the Midianites. Now he's calling them back. See, he let them all go home. Said, now we've discomfited them. They fled. Now everybody can return. We're going after them. And they killed a lot of each other on the way out. Because they were terrified. They think there's all these soldiers. So the guy next to him, he makes a sound and they take a sword, whop! They think it's the enemy.
It's dark.
And it's dark and they can't, all they can see is the light of the torches. And they're scared and so they're hacking each other up. And he says, he cries out, he sends messengers to Ephraim and says, come down against the Midianites and take before them the waters unto Berbara and Jordan. Then all the men of Ephraim gathered themselves together, took the waters unto Bethbara and Jordan, and they took princes of the Midianites, 2 princes of the Midianites, Oreb and Zeb, and they slew Oreb upon the rock Oreb, and Zeb they slew at the winepress of Zeb, and pursued Midian, and brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon on the other side of the Jordan. Now there's more to the story, but I think we covered enough of what Gideon did. Now what you have to realize is when they went after him, they overcome them all. They wiped them out.
Well, there was great confusion.
There was great confusion.
It was night. It was dark. All these lanterns. Then the screen, they're blowing the trumpets just like they did during the when they're going around the walls of Jericho. Similar, isn't it? Caused all this confusion. But it says they ran into each other's swords. They were scared. Of course, in our military we call it friendly fire, and that's
friendly fire happens
where they drop a bomb or they come in, and during Vietnam and stuff like that, a lot of that happened.
Right.
And throughout war since, where they drop bombs and stuff, they're like, man, you were off target. You just killed a whole bunch of our own guys. And so that's what happened.
I think we saw, how did Gideon get into the Hall of Faith? He was willing and obedient. Yeah. Now, did he do it because he was better than anyone?
No.
Stronger than anyone? No. Nowhere does it say that he was superior in any way. And we saw he was a scaredy cat. I keep saying that, scaredy cat. You know what I mean? And the thing that's missing, God didn't get mad at Gideon saying, do this with the dew and the dryness and then do it the other way. I want to make sure this is your will. And you should make sure it's God's will.